CELTA is one of the most well-known TEFL courses, but is it right for you and your teaching goals? In today's video, I'm talking with Fergus, who's an actual CELTA tutor, all about what is a CELTA course, what to expect, how to be successful, and what comes after CELTA. Thanks for coming on the channel today, Fergus. It's so nice to have someone with your expertise come on the channel.
I'm really delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Jamie.
Well, let's get right into it. What is a CELTA course? I know a lot of people are confused, like what is CELTA, what is TEFL, that kind of thing, and how is a CELTA course structured?
Yeah, great question. A lot of people come to me asking exactly that question. So straight off, a CELTA course, what it is a English language teaching certificate, and probably the most well-known and well-regarded one worldwide, I would say. So, a lot of people ask the question as well, what's the difference between CELTA and TEFL? And really, CELTA is a TEFL. So TEFL, that's an acronym that stands for Teaching English as a Foreign Language. So there's a bunch of courses out there in the world that offer this certification in teaching English as a foreign language. And CELTA, it is the certificate from the University of Cambridge, the actual University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. In a kind of roundabout, shortish way, that's what a CELTA is.
That's kind of the main thing, right? It is a TEFL, but it's the Cambridge brand of TEFL. And you do need to consider too where you want to teach, because some countries and some regions prefer it. So that
Right.
can be important too. I have taken a CELTA. It's been a while, but I'm interested to hear, as a trainer, how is your course structured? And I know it's quite standardized. So let us know, what is the course structure? And then if I noticed any differences, I will chime in.
You really hit the nail on the head that it is standardized, but every center can kind of set up those standards in their own way. So, what do I
Okay.
mean? First of all, what's the standardized part of it? Well, CELTA is comprised, first of all, of TP. TP stands for teaching practice, and that's probably the biggest component of what you're assessed on. So, what teaching practice is, you're going to prepare a lesson plan and you're going to teach actual students. And when you're teaching those actual students, there will be a tutor at the back of the classroom, or if you're doing it online, they'll also be part of the online classroom. And your cohort or your trainees will also be there observing you. So that's the TP component, the teaching practice component. And that's, as I said, that's probably the biggest part that you're assessed on. Then the other major kind of assessment component of the CELTA are the 4 assignments. And this, you're going to see a little bit of variability in this part. And the variability comes in terms of the order of the assignments. So
Okay. What do you recommend for people? Is it better to do the part-time course, the full-time course? I only have experience with the part-time course. I worked in a school that offered CELTA, so I saw how much people struggled with the full-time course, how stressed out they were, and they just said that it was very difficult to absorb the material that fast. But from your experience, Fergus, what did you teach and what would you recommend?
yeah, so it's a great question. And again, one that I get asked a lot, which is the best modality. And there's an extra layer to add in there, which is the face-to-face or the online course. So you can have
Yeah. Yeah.
face-to-face intensive, which is 4 weeks, or
Okay.
face-to-face extensive, which is usually, once a week over 4 months. Sometimes it's twice a week. Sometimes it's even 3 days a week. So the extensive course, again, that's done center by center. And then
Mhm.
again, you can have that online or face-to-face. So to answer that last question, which one have I taught? I've actually trained all of them. I
Okay.
would say the majority of my experience has been with the intensive version.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So it's been an intense experience I've had. And I've really, what you're saying is absolutely true, that a lot of people say that it's hard, it moves at such a fast pace. There's so much that it's hard to absorb everything in
Yeah.
the 4 weeks. So, absolutely that's true. And a lot of people have that experience. However, I just like temper that a little bit. That's not to like put people off necessarily, because for some people that intensity, that's what works for them. Because sometimes if you're on this like extensive course, it's hard to maintain the focus, I guess. And you
That's
kind of like
true. The
it can get
pace.
the pace.
Oh,
Exactly.
and what about online versus in person? Because when I did my course face to face or in person, I don't believe online was an option until, 2020 happened. And now there are more centers where you can do online. So, what are some of the biggest differences there?
Yeah, so really the biggest difference is going to be the technology component. A
Mm,
lot of people think, okay, I have a laptop or I have a cell phone, so I'm good to go. And that's mostly true. You don't need to be some kind of IT whiz to do your online CELTA. However, some people get in over their head a little bit. You want to be able to be pretty comfortable sharing your screen. I always tell people, to buy an additional monitor if you can, if you're going to do that.
100%.
Yeah, because you don't want to be jumping around between screens and your little laptop, and it just gets very stressful.
Yeah.
I think, there are more differences, and maybe, I'm old school or something. I probably would tend to prefer the face to face version
Yeah.
myself.
Me too.
Now, there's a lot of benefits to doing the online course. Absolutely. You've got access to
Hmm.
basically every center in the world, so you can shop around a lot more.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
you can work from home or study from home as well. So it's super convenient. You don't have to go through traffic. It might be a lot more cost effective for you as well. So, really, there's benefits, pros and cons to both. Whether you do the online or the face to face course, you're going to come out with the same certificate. Just my advice would be try to line it up with where you see yourself afterwards.
And it doesn't say on your certificate if you've done it online or if you've done it face to face. So that's another thing people worry about because there are some countries and some jobs that are starting to ask for courses that have been done in person, face to face. But if your certificate doesn't say that, I mean, it's the same.
Absolutely, and that's not kind of like a cheat or something on Cambridge's part, like not at all, because you still are
It's the same
assessed.
level.
It's the
Yeah.
same level, it's the same assessment, it's the same criteria that you have to achieve. So,
Mhm.
it's just a different modality that you're, or a different way that you're doing it.
When I did my course, we did a pre-interview task and then we had an interview, and that essentially lets you know if you've been accepted into the course, which is an interesting thing about CELTA because a lot of TEFL courses, you just pay the money, you sign up, you're good to go. Is that a standardized thing for all centers as well, that kind of pre-interview task? And do you have any tips for people who are doing that? Because I remember feeling quite in over my head when I did that task.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, a lot of questions. I'm going to break that one down. First of all, is it standardized? Yes, it absolutely is.
Okay.
That's a part of every CELTA worldwide. I've conducted a whole bunch of those interviews myself and various CELTAs that I've run. So, if you're thinking about doing CELTA, you are going to have to do this interview. I guess my first advice around it would be, hey, just try and relax. When I went to do my own course, there was a bunch of people who never ever stood in front of a classroom, and CELTA is aimed at that. So just try and relax. Remember, you don't have to come there knowing anything about teaching whatsoever. Just on the other side, if I could add one more kind of little tip there, it's not
Yeah.
to say like go in there with your ripped jeans on and just don't care and be whatever, Well, maybe ripped jeans are cool these days. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting old now. I don't know. But my advice here would be you probably should do a little bit of reading, a little bit of research, know what the course is about, have some thoughts ready on what you think teaching is about, what you think English language classroom would involve. Maybe know a bit about grammar, and now you don't need to be a grammar guru or anything, but know what are parts of speech like verbs and nouns and adjectives, adverbs. I'd say those four would be, a great start. And so if you go in kind of like, yeah, a few thoughts on what teaching is, a little bit of knowledge around language. Like, you don't need to read a bunch of books or anything. Just do some research, talk to somebody like myself or yourself who's been there, done that, and yeah, ultimately just go in as relaxed as you can, knowing that you're not going to get grilled. You're not gonna They're not going to try and catch you out. Really, the point of the CELTA interview is just to make sure that you have the right idea about what CELTA is going to be. And if you don't, that conversation will happen in the CELTA interview. And then it's just going to be to assess if you have the capacity to actually do the course. Because, hey, no center wants to accept somebody on the course that they're setting up for failure.
For the task, basically, it was a few different questions, and a lot of it was grammar based and kind of, you know, how would you teach this? Those kinds of questions. And I do remember speaking with the interviewer, and he said, these are how many you got correct, but don't worry, it's not about getting 100% on this. It's more so we can get an idea of what's going on and how you would approach these tasks. And they just have a bit of a conversation with you. And I also got that advice of when you're doing your CELTA course, they are assessing you from the moment you step in the door. So it is about how you interact with the tutors, how you interact with the other trainees, your students, because that's what they're looking for. It's not just can you complete the assignments, can you do the teaching practice? It's a bit more encompassing than that. So
Yeah.
that was a good tip that I remembered following, and it did help me be successful.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's how I would round off like what the assessment is. Like, I'm basically, as a tutor, I'm asking myself the question: will this person be a good teacher? And a good teacher doesn't just mean that you have your lesson plan all nicely done. I'll tell the truth. I've often written a lot of my lesson plans on a scrap of paper while I
Oh
was on the
yeah.
bus going to a lesson. But
Yeah.
delivering good lessons. So we're looking to see, do you get on well with people? Like, would you be good in a teacher's room? And a good way of seeing that is, how do you get on in the classes, or the input sessions, as they're called? How do you interact with the other people on your course? How do you interact with the students? What are you like as a person?
Input sessions. Tell us a little bit about what that is. And I think my experience was a bit interesting too, because there are some teacher observations, and we did a lot of watching videos. So we watched videos of teachers teaching, but I've also heard that sometimes it's more like the tutors are doing all of that. So, from your experience, what was it like? Did you show any videos?
Yeah, I did actually. So there's a few videos, but the other part that you say, yeah, there is the observation of the actual tutors themselves. So we will invariably do two live teaching sessions. So these are called observations of experienced teachers.
Mhm.
Now, as you correctly said, it could be a varying mix of how this is done, and there's, I wouldn't say any one super standard way, but the majority of
Okay.
courses that I've done is I will do the first hour. There's so many hours, 6 hours that you have to complete of observed teachers, observed experienced teachers, I should say. And so I will do the first hour. I'll teach that myself. Then I'll do the next 2 or 3 lessons that you have to observe as videos. And then what happens on a CELTA course at the halfway point is you change level. And what I mean by change level is this comes down to your teaching practice, or it's tied in with your teaching practice. You'll teach half of the course at usually a lower level of students. So that's the pre-intermediate usually. And then you'll
Mhm.
teach the other half of the course at a higher level, usually intermediate or upper intermediate. So when you change the level of student that you're teaching, I'll jump in then and I'll teach another lesson, usually
Okay, to
as
give
as
like an example of, okay, now we got to raise the level, and they probably notice how you're grading your language differently and all of that.
that's exactly the point of the
Mhm.
observation of experienced teachers to notice those kinds of things, to notice how to do classroom management, to notice how to present, clarify target language, how to do concept checking questions, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, let's talk a bit about non-native speakers. I recommend CELTA for non-native speakers because it is such an intense course. You're getting a lot of practice, you're getting a lot of feedback, you're observing, but there are some limitations. For example, you need to have a specific level of English in order to be successful. So when you have non-native speaking trainees, what do you tell them? What advice do you have for them? What are some of your recommendations for non-native speakers?
What would my advice be? Really, it's twofold. First of all, yeah, you kind of touched on it there. There is a language level requirement, and that now is C1. Now, if you're not familiar with what
Okay.
C1 means, it's an advanced level. So
Yeah.
there is a level actually higher than C1. It's C2. If anybody's watching and want to check out these levels, this is what's called a CEFR, this Common European Frame of Reference leveling system. Even though it has European in the name there, it's a worldwide level system. So, yeah, you're going to need to have that C1 level. Now, just some people might have heard of the Cambridge Advanced or the Cambridge C1 Advanced exam. You don't need to have an exam to prove it
Okay.
necessarily. Your level is going to be evaluated in that interview that we were talking about. But the other piece of advice I would say, once you feel okay, I've got this C1 level, I'm an advanced speaker of English, I think I'm good to go. The other piece of advice is around a kind of anxiety that a lot of non-native speakers have come to me with. Like
Hmm.
they've said things like, oh, I'm not sure, like sometimes I make grammar mistakes, or sometimes my pronunciation is a little off, or I know that I have a strong accent or something like that. What I say to non-native speaking teachers in that case is like, look at you, Jamie. You've got a different accent than I do. I've got a different accent than you do. You live in a country that is full of different accents than your own accent, and so do I. So there's not like a correct English accent. There are recognizable native speaker accents for sure. Mine is, yours is, etc. However, all that you need to have down in terms of your pronunciation or your accent is that it's clear enough for the purposes of teaching. Everything is about the purposes of teaching. The only language that you must have perfect, 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 you can probably guess it, it's the target language. It's the language that you're going to be teaching, right? So if you're going to be teaching uh, a grammar that goes like this: I am speaking, that's called the present continuous. So I is the subject, am is the auxiliary verb be, and teaching, that's the ing form of the verb. The only thing that you need to be 100% sure of is that grammar. All that I'm looking for is your language strong enough for the purposes of teaching, and do you accurately give accurate models of the target language? That's verbatim the assessment criteria from Cambridge: accurate models of the target language. So are you using that present continuous just right? If you are, you're good. Just relax about everything else.
As far as how challenging CELTA is, I guess from my experience, I s- did a lot of English teaching like you without any sort of TEFL certificate first, but I taught kids and then I did my CELTA, and after that I taught adults. And so I did find that it was quite challenging to go from teaching kids to teaching adults. It's a lot more grammar focused, and behavior management is different. It's just a bit of a different world. In your opinion, how challenging is CELTA, and what are some tips to help people with those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing there that you're touching on is just remember that it's focused on teaching adults, okay? And
Yes.
adults, for the purposes of CELTA, means from like university age up. So, you could have a class where, you've got an 18-year-old kid, and you've got, as I remember one time in my early days, I had this 65-year-old nuclear physicist. Just to labor on the point of working with adults, adults are going to be demanding in a way that kids aren't. They're going to,
A lot
look
of
for some.
questions.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. They're going to
Yeah.
look for expertise from you. And
Yeah.
again, when I say expertise, let's go back to that example. Let's say you're teaching up present continuous again, and then a student has a question about the future perfect continuous or some grammar like that. And let's say you don't know the answer, which I've been in that experience, that situation. I don't mind telling anybody. I've been asked questions where I didn't know the answer. And before I was trained, I made the cardinal sin, the biggest error that you possibly could make in that situation. I made up an answer. I felt that, oh, I'm the teacher. I must know the answer to every single question. And
Yeah.
all that did was, first of all, it made me feel bad. But worse than that, it kind of broke the trust between me and the student because it was obvious I didn't know what I was talking about. And
Yeah.
I learned very quickly that all that you have to do when you get a question that you don't know what the answer is, say, I don't know. Don't leave it at that, but say, I don't know, but that's a great question. I'm going to take a note of that and I'm going to get back to you on it. And do get back to them. Don't just say it. Do get back the following day. Do get back to them. And adults trust honesty. And the adult learning environment, I think it's really built on a different kind of trust. That kind of I just know that you're not talking BS at me. Like we all have a radar for that. So that I'd say that would be one of the big piece of advice when it comes to that kind of challenge the student will offer you. Other
Hmm.
challenges on CELTA are things around the techniques. Some of
Okay.
the big things that I find people struggle with. Let's give you a three quick fire round here. So the first one would be teacher talking time, concept checking questions, and
Yeah.
eliciting. I would
Yes.
say
100%. I agree
I,
with that.
I'm going to hand it over to you. What were your experiences with those? Because
I
I'm
think,
intrigued.
yeah, like the CCQs was the big buzzword for our group. I'm sure it's the same for every group, but it was so stressful, and it's just people are constantly, oh my gosh, am I doing it enough? Am I doing it correctly? And eliciting as well. Yeah. And these are terms that if you don't know what in the world we're talking about, you will come to understand very well when you do your CELTA course. So don't worry now,
Yeah.
you will understand. But yeah, maybe if you want to explain what each one is.
Yeah. Yeah, super quickly. So, concept checking questions, the way that I explain it is think about the word measure. If I said to you, "Do you understand the word measure?" I'm sure that well, I'm convinced that you, Jamie, you understand, and I'm convinced that everybody watching this video does understand the word measure. However, I bet if I said to you, what I was thinking of was the government measures introduced to curb crime. I bet it wasn't those
Mm,
kind of measures you were thinking
nope.
about. I bet you were thinking about this kind of measure. So,
Yep.
so then I could say to my students, measure. Do you understand measure? And everybody could legitimately say
Yeah.
yes, but it doesn't mean that they understand what I have in my mind. So basically, I just need a better way. And what I need are concept checking questions. So I need to put up on the board the government measures introduced to curb crime. So look at this word here, measures. Is that a verb or a noun? A government measure. Oh, it's a noun. Okay, great. And does that word mean distance or does it mean policy? Okay. So now I've asked you a question that if you said distance, I know that you've got the other thing in your mind, and all I have to do is just give you no, it's the other thing I said. It means policy. Like look at the example. Look at
Yeah.
what I just said there. So by your answer to my question, I know what you've got in your mind rather than just relying on do you understand? So
Yep.
that's CCQs in a nutshell. Now, there's more to it than that. But in a nutshell, that's what CCQs are. Eliciting, sometimes that's called a Socratic method. And basically, that's just instead of telling, ask questions. So it's very closely tied in with concept checking questions. Where you'll tend to elicit would be in the lead in of your lesson or where you're clarifying target language. So you might show students a visual and say, what do you see here, as a way to establish the context of your lesson. And teacher talking time, well, teacher talking time could be seen as the juxtaposition to student talking time. And CELTA has at its center an approach that's called the communicative approach. And the communicative approach looks to maximize real communication between students. Now, that's not to say that you as a teacher should become anonymous and you shouldn't speak, not at all. You should.
Be a ghost.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely needed in the classroom, absolutely. But if I were to give it like a, if I were to break down the time of a lesson and if I were to put like ballpark numbers on it, I'd say it should be like 70-30, at 30 teacher talking time and 70 student talking time. And how do you achieve that? You give your instructions, make sure they're clear and checked, and you hand it over to the learners as soon as possible. You get them to work in the task, and then you start observing and monitoring and giving feedback. So yeah, the best way to get your teacher talking time in check is to think about how can I give this to the learners as soon as possible. So yeah, there's plenty of things like that, but I would say those are if I was to give my top three things to focus on going into
Yeah.
the CELTA to know a little bit about, probably those three.
Is there any sort of job assistance? Because my course, we got no help. I've heard recently that some centers are offering their trainees maybe links or connections, things like that, to jobs abroad. From your experience, was there any job search assistance? And if there's not, what would be someone's next step after CELTA?
Yeah, it's again, that's a really big question for a lot of people taking CELTA. So my experience, most CELTA centers, this is one point where they kind of fall down. It's
Yeah.
minimal. It's minimal. The CELTA course itself has no requirement to have a input session or a class on post CELTA or finding a job. However, almost every course that I've worked on, I have made sure to have at least one session on life after CELTA, finding a job. Now, what is that? That's an hour and 15 or an hour and 30 minutes, basically giving you some tips and answering some questions. So like it's not a lot. It's actually pretty minimal. So from the Cambridge or CELTA Center's point of view, I would say could do better. But
Uh-huh.
you're absolutely right, though. A lot of schools and centers around the world who are not CELTA specific, and I know that both you and I have come across one that offers really good job assistance. A lot of these schools and TEFL centers are recognizing this gap in the market to help people with recruitment. Basically, one that I've come across, and maybe you could speak about it more, is the International TEFL Academy. They really offer a great service when it comes to finding work after CELTA. And a lot of CELTA graduates who come to me with that question, I have my own courses focused on that, but I often do recommend them the ITA's service.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of CELTA or a lot of TEFL certificates that are starting to offer kind of these job guarantees and things like that. And I think those are really good for newer teachers because it is quite overwhelming to just move to another country. You've never been there. You need to find a job. It's nice to move and have a guaranteed salary and all of that. But you don't have to do that. It is possible to find these jobs on your own without paying those extra fees. Um, but it's really up to you what your comfort level is. If you go through a course like International TEFL Academy, you do have kind of lifetime access to different guides and resources about the visa process and typical jobs, salary information. So that can be a good option if you're kind of thinking of, well, should I do CELTA? Should I do International TEFL Academy? But if you do end up going with CELTA and you find that you have no job search assistance after that, I know Fergus and I both have resources for you. I have a Teach Abroad Club, I have a course as well. And I also saw that gap is people finish their TEFL certificates and they just don't really know what that next step is. And there's a lot that goes into it. The visa process, choosing where you should teach. Are your qualifications actually valid in that country? Do you need a degree? So there's a lot that goes into it. And we are both good resources for that. Both of our channels, you'll find lots of info if you're ready for that next step after your course. Well, thank you so much for coming on the channel today and sharing your expertise. I'm sure this is very, very helpful for anyone who is interested in taking a CELTA course. And where can people connect with you, Fergus?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Jamie. Thank you so much for this conversation. I've absolutely loved it. Yeah, if people want to get in touch with me, usual places. I've a growing presence. I'm glad to say on YouTube, so you can check out the Integrated Skills Academy YouTube channel. I'm also on Instagram, Integrated Skills. I've got a Facebook page as well. So also then there's my website, and you can find that at integratedskills.mykajabi.com. We put links to all of these things. And on there, you can actually book a free call with me if you want to just talk about your plans or your current course, or as we've just been talking about, life after CELTA or TEFL. I'm available for all of those things. So yeah, I look forward to hearing from anybody who's watching this.
All right. Thanks so much. See you next time.
Thanks so much. It's been great.